The moment I walked into Le Bernardin with Grace scanning the elegant private dining room for our assigned seats, my stomach dropped. 20 perfectly arranged place cards lined the mahogany table, each bearing elegant calligraphy. I checked twice then, 3 times. Every family member, every friend, even Trevor's distant cousins had their names displayed. Mine was nowhere to be found. Amanda caught my confused expression and burst into laughter. Honestly, Daryl, I didn't think you'd actually show up tonight. Standing there in my best navy suit, which suddenly felt inadequate under the crystal chandeliers, I felt Grace's hand tighten around mine. The private dining room at Le Bernardin buzzed with sophisticated conversation, but all I could hear was the echo of my sister's casual dismissal. Amanda wore a stunning emerald dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, her engagement ring, catching the light as she gestured dismissively in my direction. "What do you mean you didn't think I'd show up?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "You sent me an invitation 3 weeks ago." Amanda shrugged, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the overhead lighting. "You always find excuses to skip family events, Daryl. Remember Mom's birthday last year, Dad's retirement party? You sent those pathetic last-minute texts about work emergencies." Grace stepped forward, her brown eyes flashing with anger. "Those weren't excuses. Daryl was working mandatory overtime during tax season, and your father's party conflicted with his professional certification exam." "Oh, how convenient," Amanda replied with a laugh that sounded more like a bark. "Always the victim, always the excuse." She turned to address the room. "Everyone, this is my brother Daryl and his girlfriend Grace. They'll just grab drinks at the bar while we handle the real celebration." My face burned with embarrassment as 20 pairs of eyes turned toward us. Grace tugged at my sleeve. "We should leave," she whispered. "This is deliberately humiliating." But something stubborn inside me refused to retreat. Amanda was my sister, my only sibling, and despite her cruelty, I wanted to be here for her engagement. "No," I said quietly. "We're staying." The massive oak bar dominated one corner of the private room, adorned with fresh orchids and premium liquors. As Grace and I approached, the bartender offered us champagne from a silver tray. The rest of the party took their assigned seats around the mahogany table, which was set with fine china and crystal glasses that probably cost more than my car payment. "This is absolutely ridiculous," Grace muttered, accepting a glass of Dom Perignon. "Your sister deliberately excluded you from seating arrangements at her own engagement party." Before I could respond, the room erupted in excited chatter as Trevor's parents arrived. Bradley Morrison entered first, his silver hair perfectly styled, wearing a custom-tailored charcoal suit that screamed wealth. His wife Stephanie followed, dripping in diamonds and carrying herself with the practiced grace of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. "Trevor, darling." Stephanie called out, air kissing her son on both cheeks. "What a lovely venue choice. Very appropriate for our family standards." Bradley's eyes swept the room, cataloging every detail with the practiced assessment of a successful businessman. His gaze landed on Grace and me standing at the bar, and his expression shifted to confusion. "Excuse me," he called out, approaching us with confident strides. "Are you part of the catering staff? I'd like to discuss the wine selection for tonight." The question hit like a physical blow. Grace's mouth dropped open, and I felt my cheeks burn with humiliation. "I'm Daryl," I managed. "Amanda's brother." Bradley's eyebrows rose skeptically. "Amanda's brother? I don't recall Trevor mentioning." He looked me up and down, taking in my off-the-rack suit and modest watch. "What exactly do you do for work?" "I'm an accountant with Henderson and Associates," I replied, proud of my position despite his condescending tone. "Oh." Bradley's interest evaporated immediately. "How practical." Stephanie joined her husband, her cold blue eyes appraising me like an unwanted piece of furniture. "This is Amanda's brother." My goodness, the family resemblance is quite minimal, isn't it? She laughed a sound like breaking glass. I suppose not everyone can be blessed with Amanda's advantages. Amanda appeared at their side, beaming with pleasure at their attention. Daryl's always been the academic type, she said with false sweetness. Very serious, very focused on his little numbers. Not much for social gatherings, really. That explains the seating arrangement, Stephanie said with mock understanding. How thoughtful of you to accommodate his preferences. Grace's hand gripped her champagne glass so tightly I worried it might shatter. His preferences, she said sharply. You mean excluding him from his own sister's celebration? Now, Bradley intervened with patronizing calm. I'm sure Amanda knows her brother's comfort level best. Some people simply aren't suited for elegant occasions. The casual cruelty of his words stunned me into silence. These people who had known me for exactly 3 minutes had already decided I was beneath their notice. Worse, Amanda was encouraging their dismissal, basking in their approval, while they insulted her own family. My parents arrived precisely at 7:30, as always punctual to a fault. Harold still carried himself with the straight-backed posture of his police career, while Patricia clutched her purse nervously, clearly uncomfortable in such an upscale environment. They spotted me at the bar and approached with relieved smiles. There you are, sweetheart, Mom said, kissing my cheek. We were looking for your seat at the table. Apparently there isn't one, Grace said bluntly. Dad's jaw tightened, and I recognized the dangerous calm that had made him an effective police officer for 30 years. What do you mean there isn't one? Amanda didn't think I'd actually attend? I explained, hating how defeated I sounded. Mom's face flushed with embarrassment. Surely there's been some mistake. Amanda, honey, she called out desperately. Amanda glided over her arm linked possessively with Trevor's. Oh, hi, Mom, Dad. Isn't this wonderful? The Morrisons chose such a perfect venue for our celebration. Amanda, where is your brother supposed to sit? Dad asked quietly. He's fine at the bar, Daddy. Really, it's more his style anyway. Less formal pressure, you know how he gets in social situations. The lie landed like a slap. I'd never struggled in social situations. I had spent years attending police department gatherings, office parties, family reunions without any awkwardness. Amanda was rewriting history to justify her cruelty. Trevor, who had remained silent throughout this entire exchange, finally spoke. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, raising his champagne glass. Thank you all for joining Amanda and me tonight to celebrate our engagement. The room fell silent except for the gentle clinking of glasses. I remained at the bar, excluded from the intimate circle of family and friends, watching my sister's moment of triumph while she pretended I didn't exist. Grace's hand found mine, squeezing tightly in silent support. To new beginnings, Trevor continued, and to the family that makes them possible. Everyone raised their glasses except Grace and me. We stood at the periphery, witnesses to a celebration that had deliberately excluded us, watching my sister smile with satisfaction at my public humiliation. The appetizer course arrived with theatrical precision, each plate a small masterpiece of culinary artistry. Oysters, Rockefeller caviar service, and delicate lobster canapes circulated among the seated guests while Grace and I remained standing at the bar, invisible to the servers and ignored by the celebration. From our position, I could overhear fragments of conversation that made my blood run cold. Amanda and Trevor sat at the head of the table, their voices carrying clearly in the acoustically perfect dining room. The renovations to the Hampton house will cost about $400,000, Trevor was saying casually as if discussing grocery expenses. But with the family contribution from your grandmother's estate, we should be comfortable. Amanda nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. It's so wonderful that Daryl was generous enough to waive his inheritance rights. Really shows his support for our future together. My champagne glass nearly slipped from my suddenly numb fingers. Grace heard it too, her legal training immediately recognizing the significance. She leaned close to my ear. Did you waive inheritance rights? she whispered urgently. Absolutely not, I breathed back. I've never signed any document like that. Grace's expression shifted into prosecutor mode, sharp and focused. Then your sister is committing fraud. Inheritance fraud is a felony, Daryl. The conversation at the table continued, each word driving the knife deeper into my understanding of Amanda's deception. She spoke confidently about grandmother Eleanor's estate, describing financial arrangements I had never agreed to, painting herself as the sole beneficiary of our grandmother's generosity. Stephanie Morrison leaned forward with interest. How refreshing to see such family harmony over inheritance matters. So many families tear themselves apart over money. Well, Amanda said, with practiced humility, Daryl has always understood that some people are better positioned to manage family wealth responsibly. He's more comfortable with his simple lifestyle. The casual lies flowed from her lips like water, each one more devastating than the last. She was systematically erasing my relationship with my grandmother, stealing my inheritance, and rewriting our family history for Trevor's wealthy parents. Grace pulled out her phone, discreetly opening her voice recording app. Her prosecutorial instincts had kicked in completely. Keep listening, she murmured. This is evidence. Bradley Morrison raised his wine glass with approval. It takes maturity to recognize one's limitations. Not everyone is cut out for managing significant assets. Exactly, Amanda agreed. Daryl's always been more focused on his small-scale accounting work. The responsibility of substantial wealth would probably overwhelm him. Fury burned in my chest like acid. I had built a successful career, managed complex financial portfolios for clients, earned professional certifications that Amanda couldn't even pronounce. Yet here she sat, painting me as some hapless, incompetent who couldn't handle money. She's lying, I whispered to Grace. I visit Grandma Eleanor every week. She's never mentioned changing her will. Grace's face went pale. Daryl, when was the last time you saw your grandmother? I thought back, my stomach dropping. 3 weeks ago. But she seemed confused. More than usual. She kept asking me about papers she couldn't remember signing. Early dementia, Grace asked quietly. The doctor said mild cognitive impairment, but perfect for manipulation, Grace finished grimly. At that moment, Mom approached us, looking deeply uncomfortable. She glanced around nervously before speaking in hushed tones. Daryl, honey, I need to tell you something about your grandmother's estate. My blood turned to ice. What about it? Amanda's been handling Eleanor's affairs for the past 6 months. She said you were too busy with work to help, that you'd asked her to take over. That's not true, Mom. I never asked her to do anything like that. Patricia's face crumpled with guilt. I was afraid of that. But Amanda, she said you'd agreed to let her manage everything. She showed us official-looking documents. Forged documents, Grace said coldly. Your daughter is committing elder abuse and inheritance fraud. Mom gasped, pressing her hand to her chest. Oh God, what have we done? We should have questioned it, but Amanda was so convincing, so confident. Dad joined our huddle, his police officer instincts clearly activated. Patricia, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. Harold, I think Amanda's been lying about Eleanor's estate, about Daryl's inheritance. Dad's jaw set in the hard line I remembered from my childhood when he was about to deliver serious consequences. What kind of lying is it? Before Mom could answer, Amanda's voice carried across the room. Again, this time addressing the entire table. I want to thank Trevor's parents for understanding that some family members contribute differently to special occasions. Not everyone can participate at the same level, and that's perfectly fine. The pointed barb was clearly directed at me, another public humiliation designed to justify my exclusion. Stephanie Morrison nodded approvingly. Of course, dear. We completely understand that not all families have the same resources or priorities. Grace had heard enough. She strode purposefully toward the table, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor like bullets. I followed, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. Amanda, Grace said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Could you clarify something about your brother's inheritance for the table? Amanda's smile faltered slightly. I'm sorry, what? You mentioned that Daryl waived his inheritance rights to your grandmother's estate. I'm curious about the legal documentation for that decision. The table fell silent except for the soft classical music playing through the restaurant's sound system. Amanda's face flushed, but she maintained her composure. I don't think family financial matters are appropriate dinner conversation, Grace. Actually, as a prosecutor specializing in elder abuse cases, I think inheritance fraud is always appropriate conversation, Grace replied smoothly. The words landed like a bomb in the elegant dining room. Trevor's parents exchanged alarmed glances while my parents looked mortified. Amanda's perfectly composed mask finally slipped, revealing the calculating manipulator underneath. You're being ridiculous, Amanda said, but her voice lacked its earlier confidence. Am I because Daryl has never signed any documents waiving his inheritance rights? So either you're mistaken about the legal status of your grandmother's estate, or you're committing felony fraud. The silence stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. 20 pairs of eyes focused on Amanda, waiting for her response, watching her engagement celebration transform into a criminal investigation. The appetizer plates had been cleared away in uncomfortable silence, replaced by the main course rack of lamb with rosemary reduction roasted duck breast and pan-seared halibut that under normal circumstances would have been absolutely exquisite. But the tension in the room had transformed the elegant meal into a theatrical backdrop for family destruction. Trevor's family huddled together at their end of the table, whispering urgently among themselves. I caught fragments of their conversation. Criminal allegations, reputation concerns, and perhaps we should reconsider. Amanda noticed their withdrawal, and her desperation became palpable. Grace is exaggerating everything, Amanda announced to the table, forcing a bright smile. She's always been prone to dramatic interpretations. It's a lawyer thing, you know how they are. But the damage was spreading like ink in water. Bradley Morrison's business instincts had clearly activated, and he was assessing risk factors with cold calculation. Stephanie kept glancing toward the exit as if planning an escape route. The dinner conversation limped along with artificial pleasantries and forced laughter. Amanda worked overtime to redirect attention back to her engagement, describing elaborate wedding plans and honeymoon destinations with increasingly desperate enthusiasm. Trevor remained unusually quiet, his earlier confidence replaced by obvious discomfort. As the evening progressed, I noticed subtle changes in the group dynamics. The Morrisons became more reserved, their earlier warmth toward Amanda cooling noticeably. My parents looked increasingly guilty and uncomfortable, stealing worried glances at each other across the table. The final course arrived chocolate souffle with gold leaf garnish and champagne reduction sauce. It was a dessert that probably cost more than most people spent on an entire meal, served with the theatrical flourish that Le Bernardin was famous for. But I could barely taste it, my stomach churning with anxiety about the confrontation that was clearly building toward some inevitable climax. Grace remained alert beside me, her prosecutorial instincts fully engaged. She had stopped recording, but kept her phone readily accessible, clearly prepared for whatever revelation might emerge next. At precisely 10:15, the restaurant manager approached our table, carrying a leather portfolio that I recognized immediately as the bill presentation. He was an elegant man in his 50s, with the practiced discretion of someone accustomed to handling wealthy clientele and potentially awkward financial situations. Without hesitation, he placed the portfolio directly in front of me. My heart stopped. The gesture was so unexpected, so brazen, that for a moment I couldn't process what was happening. Everyone at the table turned to stare as I sat frozen, the leather portfolio like a loaded weapon in front of my untouched dessert plate. Amanda's smile returned bright and predatory. Well, go ahead, Daryl. Open it. My hands trembled slightly as I lifted the leather cover. The bill was itemized in elegant script on heavy cardstock paper, premium champagne service, 7-course tasting menu for 20 guests, wine pairings, service charges, tax. The total at the bottom made my vision blur $2,900. "What the hell is this?" I managed to say. Amanda clasped her hands together with mock delight. "Your contribution to my engagement celebration, of course. Since you insisted on coming despite not being properly invited, I thought you could show your support by handling the expenses." The blood drained from my face. "You can't be serious." "Oh, but I am," Amanda said sweetly. "I spoke with the restaurant management when we arrived. I explained that my generous brother would be covering tonight's celebration as his engagement gift to Trevor and me." Bradley Morrison nodded approvingly. "How thoughtful. It's wonderful when family members step up during important occasions." I didn't agree to pay for anything, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Stephanie Morrison looked puzzled. "But surely you came prepared to contribute something meaningful? This is your sister's engagement party." The trap was perfect and completely premeditated. Amanda had orchestrated every detail, the missing place card, to establish my outsider status, the public humiliation, to justify my exile to the bar, and now the financial ambush to complete my destruction. She had planned this entire evening as an elaborate punishment. "Amanda told us you were excited to treat everyone tonight," Trevor said quietly, speaking for the first time in over an hour. "She said it was your idea." "That's a complete lie," Grace said sharply, standing up from her seat. "We weren't even properly invited to this dinner." Amanda's mask slipped entirely. "Oh, please don't be so dramatic. Daryl's always trying to get out of family obligations. The least he can do is contribute financially when he actually shows up." "Contribute financially," I repeated, incredulous. "Amanda, this bill is almost $3,000. I'm an accountant, not an investment banker." "Maybe you should have considered that before coming to an upscale restaurant," Stephanie said coldly. The restaurant manager cleared his throat diplomatically. "I do apologize for any confusion, but the billing arrangement was specifically requested by Miss Amanda when she made the reservation. She indicated that her brother would be handling the evening's expenses." My entire body felt numb. Amanda had planned this humiliation weeks in advance, using my expected attendance as an opportunity to saddle me with debt I couldn't afford while simultaneously demonstrating my inadequacy to Trevor's wealthy family. Grace stepped forward, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to courtroom confrontations. "Excuse me, but we need to clarify something important here." She turned to address the restaurant manager directly. "Could you please confirm whether my boyfriend and I were included on the original guest list for this private party?" The manager consulted his tablet discreetly. "Let me check our reservation details." After a moment, he looked up with professional confusion. "I show the reservation was made for 18 guests. You and Mr. Daryl," I supplied weakly. "You and Mr. Daryl are not listed among the confirmed attendees." Grace smiled with cold satisfaction. "Perfect. Then we're not actually guests at this private party, are we?" Amanda's face went pale. "What are you trying to do?" "I'm clarifying that since we weren't on the guest list, we have no legal or social obligation to pay for a celebration. We weren't formally invited to attend." Grace turned back to the restaurant manager. "Sir, if someone crashes a private party without being on the guest list, are they responsible for paying the bill?" The manager looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Well, no. The financial responsibility would typically fall to whoever organized and hosted the event." Grace gestured toward Amanda with theatrical precision. "Then I suggest you present the bill to the actual host of this celebration. Try the bride." The simple phrase landed like a nuclear bomb in the elegant dining room. Amanda's mouth fell open in shock, Trevor's parents looked scandalized, and my parents appeared ready to disappear into the floor. The restaurant manager, trained in diplomatic crisis management, smoothly lifted the leather portfolio from in front of me and placed it directly in front of Amanda. "Miss Amanda, it appears there's been some confusion about the billing arrangement. As the host of this private party, the responsibility for payment falls to you." Amanda stared at the bill like it might burst into flames. Her elaborate plan to humiliate and financially destroy me had just collapsed spectacularly, leaving her holding responsibility for expenses she clearly couldn't afford. The silence that followed was deafening. Amanda stared at the leather portfolio as if it contained a live scorpion. Her perfectly manicured hands trembled slightly as she opened it, her face draining of color when she saw the total. $2,900. The amount that she had intended to saddle me with now sat squarely on her shoulders. "There must be some mistake," she stammered, looking desperately around the table for support. "Daryl was supposed to handle this. We discussed it." "When exactly did we discuss it?" I asked quietly. "Because I have no memory of agreeing to pay for anything tonight." Trevor leaned forward, his confusion evident. "Amanda, you told me your brother insisted on treating everyone. You said it was his way of showing support for our engagement." The lie hung in the air like poisonous gas. Amanda's credibility was crumbling in real time, each contradiction exposing the depth of her deception. Grace seized the moment with prosecutorial precision. "Ladies and gentlemen," Grace said, addressing the entire table with courtroom authority, "I think it's time for some transparency here." She reached into her purse and withdrew her business card, placing it ceremoniously on the table. "I'm Grace Mitchell, Assistant District Attorney for Manhattan, specializing in elder abuse and financial fraud cases." The words hit like lightning strikes. Bradley Morrison's face went ashen while Stephanie gripped her wine glass with white knuckles. Trevor looked like he'd been physically slapped. "What I've witnessed tonight constitutes multiple felony offenses." Grace continued with chilling calm. "Elder abuse, inheritance fraud, and financial manipulation of a vulnerable adult with cognitive impairment." Amanda jumped to her feet, desperation replacing her earlier smugness. "You can't be serious. This is my engagement party, not some courtroom drama. Actually, as a sworn prosecutor, I have a legal obligation to report suspected elder abuse. What you've described regarding your grandmother's estate constitutes criminal activity that I cannot ignore." Grace began ticking off violations on her fingers like she was reading charges. First, manipulating an elderly person with dementia into signing legal documents they cannot understand. Second, forging inheritance waivers without the knowledge or consent of legitimate beneficiaries. Third, systematically isolating an elderly person from family members to facilitate continued exploitation. The clinical precision of her words transformed the elegant dining room into an impromptu criminal investigation. Trevor's parents exchanged horrified glances, clearly calculating the reputational damage of being associated with a criminal defendant. "These aren't minor infractions," Grace explained to the stunned table. "Elder abuse in New York carries a maximum sentence of 7 years in state prison. Financial fraud involving amounts over $50,000 is a Class C felony." Bradley Morrison stood up abruptly, his business instincts overriding social politeness. "Trevor, we need to discuss this privately, immediately." Amanda's panic became palpable. "Grace is exaggerating everything. She's trying to destroy my relationship because she's jealous of my success." "Am I exaggerating?" Grace asked coolly. She pulled out her phone and opened her voice recording app. "Because I've been documenting tonight's conversation, including your detailed descriptions of inheritance arrangements that your brother never agreed to." The phone sat on the table like evidence in a criminal trial. Everyone stared at it, understanding that Amanda's own words had been captured, preserved, and could potentially be used against her in court. Trevor's voice was barely above a whisper. "Amanda, is any of this true?" "Of course not," Amanda said desperately. "Grace is trying to intimidate everyone with legal threats. She's probably not even a real prosecutor." Grace reached into her purse again and withdrew her official district attorney identification, placing it next to her business card. The gold badge gleamed under the chandelier, lighting its authenticity undeniable. "I've been with the Manhattan District Attorney's Office for 6 years. Grace said matter-of-factly. I've prosecuted over 200 cases involving financial crimes against elderly victims. What you've described tonight matches the pattern of every major elder abuse case I've handled. Stephanie Morrison's voice cracked with barely controlled panic. Trevor, darling, perhaps we should postpone any wedding planning until these allegations are resolved. The restaurant manager, clearly uncomfortable with the criminal investigation unfolding in his dining room, approached our table with diplomatic caution. Ladies and gentlemen, I do apologize for interrupting, but we need to resolve the billing situation. Should I contact security to assist with this matter? Amanda's world was collapsing around her like a house of cards. The engagement party she had planned as my humiliation had become her own public destruction. Her fiancé's wealthy family was distancing themselves rapidly, her criminal activity was being documented by a prosecutor, and she was stuck with a restaurant bill she couldn't afford. Please don't call security, Amanda pleaded. This is all a terrible misunderstanding. Grace turned to the restaurant manager with professional courtesy. Sir, as a prosecutor investigating potential criminal activity, I need you to understand that this woman has committed fraud tonight. She deliberately misrepresented the billing arrangement to transfer financial responsibility to someone who was never legally obligated to pay. I see, the manager replied carefully. And how would you recommend we proceed? The bill remains the responsibility of whoever organized and hosted this private party, Grace explained. Any attempt to coerce payment from uninvited guests would constitute fraud. Trevor stood up slowly, his face a mask of betrayal and disappointment. Amanda, I need you to answer me honestly. Did you lie to me about your brother? About your family's financial situation? About any of this? Amanda looked around the table desperately, searching for an ally, someone who might support her version of events. But every face reflected disgust, disappointment, or fear. Even my parents, who had enabled her behavior for years, looked horrified by the scope of her deception. I was trying to protect our future, Amanda said weakly. Daryl doesn't understand family responsibility. He's never contributed to anything important. By committing felony fraud, Grace asked incredulously. By abusing your elderly grandmother, by manipulating legal documents and stealing inheritance money? The questions hung in the air unanswered because there was no reasonable answer. Amanda had revealed herself completely, a calculating manipulator willing to destroy family relationships and commit serious crimes for personal gain. Trevor's parents were already gathering their belongings, clearly planning to flee the toxic situation as quickly as possible. The engagement celebration had become a crime scene, and they wanted no part of the legal aftermath. Grace pulled out her phone and dialed a number with deliberate precision. This is Assistant DA Grace Mitchell, badge number 4789. I need to report suspected elder abuse and inheritance fraud. I'm requesting immediate emergency intervention for a vulnerable adult. Amanda sank into her chair, finally understanding that her criminal activity had real consequences. The engagement party was over, her relationship was destroyed, and she was facing potential imprisonment. The game was finished and justice was about to be served. The elegant private dining room had transformed into something resembling a crime scene investigation. Grace spoke quietly into her phone with the district attorney's emergency hotline, while Amanda sat frozen in her chair, staring at the unpaid restaurant bill like it might provide some miraculous escape from her rapidly deteriorating situation. Trevor's parents gathered their belongings with the practiced efficiency of people accustomed to avoiding scandal. Bradley Morrison pulled his son aside for an urgent, whispered conversation near the windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline. That's when my father, Harold, who had remained unusually quiet throughout the entire evening, finally stood up from his seat. At 68 years old, he still carried himself with the commanding presence that had made him an effective police officer for 3 decades. His weathered face was set in the expression I remembered from childhood when he was about to deliver serious consequences. I think it's time I contributed to this conversation, Dad said, his voice carrying the authority that had once commanded respect from criminals and colleagues alike. Amanda looked up, hopefully perhaps expecting her father to defend her or minimize the situation. Instead, Dad reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a manila folder that he placed carefully on the table in front of everyone. As a retired police officer, Dad began slowly, "I've been conducting my own investigation into Amanda's activities for the past 4 months." The statement landed like a physical blow. Amanda's face went completely white while Grace stopped her phone conversation to listen intently. 4 months ago, Dad continued, "Your grandmother Eleanor called me in a state of confusion. She was asking about legal documents she couldn't remember, signing bank account changes she didn't understand, and financial decisions that didn't make sense to her." He opened the manila folder with deliberate precision, revealing a stack of papers, photographs, and official documents. "So I did what any good cop would do. I started investigating." Amanda tried to interrupt. "Daddy, you don't understand what I understand," Dad cut her off sharply, "is that you've been systematically manipulating and abusing your own grandmother for financial gain. What I understand is that you've committed multiple felonies that I am legally and morally obligated to report." Grace moved closer to examine the documents Dad had produced. Her prosecutorial training was clearly engaged as she scanned the evidence with professional interest. Dad continued his methodical presentation. "These are bank records showing unauthorized withdrawals from Eleanor's accounts. These are witness statements from her neighbors, documenting your visits and the distressed condition she was in afterward. These are photographs of legal documents with signatures that our handwriting expert believes are forgeries." Each revelation hit Amanda like a physical assault. Her elaborate criminal scheme wasn't just being exposed, it had been under professional investigation for months. The evidence was comprehensive, documented, and legally admissible. "I've been working with Adult Protective Services since February," Dad explained. "We've been building a case slowly and carefully to ensure Eleanor's safety and to document the full scope of the financial abuse." Trevor's face was a mask of betrayal and disgust. "You've been lying to me about everything. Your family's financial situation, your character, your basic honesty about who you are." Bradley Morrison approached the table, his business instincts clearly calculating damage control. "Trevor, we need to leave immediately. This family's criminal problems cannot be associated with our reputation or our business interests." "Wait," Trevor said quietly, addressing my father directly. "Mr. Patterson, how extensive is this investigation?" Dad's cop instincts recognized genuine concern versus self-interested damage control. The financial fraud totals approximately $240,000 over 18 months. The elder abuse charges carry potential prison sentences of 5 to 7 years. Stephanie Morrison gasped audibly. $240,000? "That's correct," Dad confirmed. Bank records show systematic extraction of funds from Eleanor's accounts, forged power of attorney documents, and manipulation of her will and trust arrangements. Grace looked up from the documents with grim satisfaction. "This is exactly the type of case we prosecute aggressively. The evidence appears overwhelming." Amanda finally found her voice, though it came out as a desperate whisper. "Daddy, please? You're destroying my entire life over some paperwork confusion." Dad's expression hardened. "I'm protecting my mother from criminal abuse by her own granddaughter, the same granddaughter who just tried to commit fraud against her own brother." He turned to address the entire table. Tonight's restaurant scam was just the latest example of Amanda's willingness to lie, manipulate, and steal from her own family members. Trevor stood up abruptly, his decision clearly made. "Amanda, I cannot marry someone who commits crimes against elderly family members. I cannot build a life with someone who has lied to me about fundamental aspects of her character." "Trevor, please," Amanda begged. "This is all exaggerated. They're making everything sound worse than it actually is." "Worse than stealing from your grandmother with dementia?" Trevor asked incredulously. "Worse than trying to defraud your brother? Worse than Lying to me for months about who you really are? Grace finished her phone conversation and returned to the table with official authority. Adult Protective Services is sending an emergency team to check on Eleanor immediately. The district attorney's office is opening a formal investigation into inheritance fraud and elder abuse. Amanda's engagement was disintegrating in real time. Her criminal activity was being professionally documented, and her family relationships were destroyed beyond repair. The restaurant bill sitting in front of her had become the least of her problems. The consequences she had avoided for months through manipulation and lies were finally catching up with devastating completeness. The silence that followed Grace's announcement was broken only by the distant sounds of Manhattan traffic 20 floors below. The elegant private dining room had become a courtroom where Amanda's crimes were being exposed with methodical precision. Trevor walked slowly around the table, his movements deliberate and final. When he reached Amanda's chair, he stopped and extended his hand toward her. "Give me the ring," he said quietly. Amanda's hands flew protectively to her engagement ring, the massive diamond that had symbolized her victory over my simple lifestyle and modest success. "Trevor, you can't be serious. We're supposed to be married in 6 months. Give me the ring, Amanda." The command carried the weight of absolute finality. Trevor wasn't angry or emotional. He was simply done. The revelation of her criminal character had killed whatever love or respect he had felt for her. "Please," Amanda whispered, tears starting to flow down her carefully made-up face. "Don't let them destroy what we have. They're jealous of our success, our future together." Trevor's voice remained steady and cold. "What we had was built on lies. You manipulated me just like you manipulated your grandmother. I've been dating a criminal who was pretending to be someone else entirely." With trembling fingers, Amanda slowly removed the engagement ring. The diamond caught the chandelier light one last time before Trevor pocketed it without ceremony. "Ladies and gentlemen," Trevor announced to the table, "this engagement is officially terminated." Bradley Morrison stepped forward with visible relief. "Trevor, you made the right decision. Our family cannot be associated with criminal activity or elder abuse. I apologize to everyone." Trevor continued addressing my parents specifically for my family's earlier treatment of Daryl. We made judgments based on Amanda's lies and misrepresentations. Stephanie Morrison, who had earlier dismissed me as unsuitable for elegant occasions, now looked mortified by her behavior. "Mr. Patterson, please accept our sincere apologies. We were completely misled about your character and your family situation." The restaurant manager, who had been watching this drama unfold with professional discretion, approached our table once again. "Given the unusual circumstances, Mr. Morrison Sr. has offered to resolve the billing situation as an apology for his family's earlier conduct." Bradley nodded gravely. "It's the least we can do to make amends for this terrible situation." Amanda's world had completely collapsed. Her engagement was destroyed, her criminal activity was being investigated, her family relationships were shattered, and she was facing potential imprisonment. The humiliation she had planned for me had rebounded with devastating completeness. Security guards appeared at the dining room entrance, summoned by the restaurant manager, who had grown concerned about the escalating situation. Amanda noticed them and panic flashed across her face. "I need to leave," she said desperately, starting to rise from her chair. "Actually," Grace said firmly, "you need to stay put. Adult Protective Services will want to interview you tonight, and the district attorney's office will be filing charges within 48 hours. Dad opened his manila folder again and withdrew an official-looking document. "Amanda, this is a restraining order prohibiting you from contacting or visiting your grandmother. It was issued this morning based on our evidence of ongoing elder abuse." Amanda stared at the document in shock. "This morning, you planned all of this?" "We didn't plan anything," Dad said calmly. "We simply documented your criminal activity and took appropriate legal action to protect Eleanor." Grace was already on her phone again, speaking with someone from the district attorney's office. "Yes, the suspect is present and the evidence is substantial. We'll need an interview team and preliminary charges prepared for first appearance court tomorrow morning. The reality of impending arrest finally penetrated Amanda's denial. She looked around the table desperately searching for some sign of sympathy or support from family members who had enabled her behavior for years. Mom spoke for the first time in over an hour, her voice heavy with guilt and disappointment. "Amanda, honey, what you've done to Eleanor is unforgivable. Your own grandmother trusted you, and you stole from her when she was most vulnerable." "I was trying to protect family assets," Amanda said weakly. "Daryl wouldn't have managed the inheritance responsibly." "That wasn't your decision to make," Dad said sharply. "And stealing from an elderly woman with dementia isn't protecting anything except your own greed." Trevor gathered his belongings and approached me directly. "Daryl, I owe you a personal apology. Amanda painted you as irresponsible and selfish, but tonight I've seen your real character. You're a decent man who was being systematically abused by his own sister." He extended his hand for a firm handshake. "Thank you for exposing her true nature before I made the mistake of marrying her." The security guards approached Amanda's chair as Grace concluded her phone call. "Miss Patterson, we're going to need you to come with us for questioning regarding elder abuse charges." Amanda's composure finally shattered completely. "This is insane. You're all destroying my life over some family misunderstanding." "Some family misunderstanding," Grace repeated incredulously. "You committed felony fraud, elder abuse, and theft. These are serious crimes with serious consequences." As the security guards prepared to escort Amanda from the restaurant, she turned to me with pure hatred in her eyes. "You did this," she hissed. "You couldn't stand seeing me succeed, so you turned everyone against me." The accusation was so fundamentally wrong, so divorced from reality, that I almost laughed. Amanda had orchestrated her own destruction through months of criminal activity and years of family manipulation. I had simply existed while she revealed her true character. "I didn't do anything, Amanda," I said quietly. "You did this to yourself?" Grace squeezed my hand supportively as we watched Amanda being led away from her own engagement party, her elaborate plan for my humiliation having destroyed her life instead of mine. Justice wasn't just being served. It was being delivered with the precision of a perfectly executed legal case. The elegant private dining room fell silent, except for the gentle sounds of servers clearing away the remnants of what had been intended as a celebration but had become a reckoning. 3 months later, I sat in the comfortable common area of Sunset Manor, Eleanor's new assisted living facility, watching my grandmother work on a watercolor painting of the courtyard garden visible through the large windows. The transformation in her condition since being removed from Amanda's manipulation was remarkable and heartbreaking in equal measure. "The flowers are so much brighter when you're not worried all the time," Eleanor said, adding delicate pink touches to the cherry blossoms she was painting. I couldn't understand why I felt so confused and frightened in my old apartment. The admission cut deep because it confirmed everything we had suspected about Amanda's psychological manipulation. Eleanor's cognitive impairment had been significantly worsened by the constant stress of being pressured to sign documents she didn't understand and make financial decisions that felt wrong to her. "Grandma, do you remember feeling pressured about your will or your bank accounts?" I asked gently. Eleanor's brush paused mid-stroke. "Oh, yes. Amanda was always bringing papers for me to sign. She said they were important family matters, but they made me feel sick to my stomach. I kept trying to call you, but she said you were too busy with work to help with family responsibilities." The systematic isolation had been deliberate and cruel. Amanda had prevented Eleanor from seeking help or verification from other family members, creating a bubble of confusion and dependency that facilitated continued exploitation. "I'm sorry we didn't protect you sooner," I said. Eleanor reached over and patted my hand with fingers still stained with watercolor paint. "Sweetheart, you saved me. Adult Protective Services told me that you and your father had been investigating for months to build a case against Amanda. You protected me when I couldn't protect myself." Grace arrived at that moment carrying coffee and pastries from Eleanor's favorite bakery. Over the past 3 months, she had become like a granddaughter to Eleanor, visiting twice a week and helping with legal paperwork related to the criminal case. "How's our favorite artist today?" Grace asked, kissing Eleanor's cheek and examining the watercolor painting with genuine admiration. "Much better now that the legal mess is finally resolved," Eleanor replied. "Grace, dear, tell Daryl about Amanda's sentencing. I still can't believe my own granddaughter." Grace settled into the chair beside me, her expression mixing professional satisfaction with personal sadness. "Amanda pled guilty to elder abuse and financial fraud last week. She received 18 months in county jail plus 5 years probation. She's also required to pay full restitution and cannot contact Eleanor under any circumstances. The justice was appropriate but still felt strange. Amanda was my sister despite everything she had done. And watching her face, the consequences of her crimes brought no satisfaction, only a profound sadness for what our family relationship might have been." "What about the inheritance situation?" I asked. "Completely resolved," Grace replied. "The forged documents have been nullified, Eleanor's original will has been reinstated, and the stolen funds are being recovered through asset seizure. You'll receive your rightful inheritance according to your grandmother's wishes." Eleanor squeezed my hand. "I always intended for you to inherit the house, Daryl. Amanda knew that, which is why she worked so hard to manipulate the legal documents. She couldn't stand the idea of you receiving something she wanted. The house in question was Eleanor's modest 2-story home in Queens, worth approximately $150,000. Nothing spectacular by New York standards, but a significant asset that represented Eleanor's lifelong savings and my family's working-class heritage." Grace pulled out an envelope from her purse. "Actually, there's something else. Trevor Morrison sent this letter for you." I opened the heavy cardstock paper, recognizing Trevor's precise handwriting. The letter was brief but heartfelt. "Daryl, I wanted to thank you again for exposing Amanda's criminal behavior before I made the catastrophic mistake of marrying her. The investigators discovered that she had already begun manipulating my family's finances, planning to steal from us just like she stole from your grandmother. You saved my family from becoming her next victims. I hope you can find peace and healing after everything she put you through. You're a man of genuine integrity, and I regret that my family initially judged you so harshly. Trevor Morrison." "He's a good man," Grace observed. "Amanda almost destroyed him too." Over the following hour, we helped Eleanor organize her art supplies and walked through the facility's beautiful gardens. The assisted living community had given her structure, social interaction, and most importantly, safety from manipulation and abuse. As we prepared to leave, Eleanor pulled me aside for a private conversation. "Daryl, I need you to understand something important. What happened with Amanda wasn't about money or inheritance. It was about power and control. She couldn't tolerate the idea that someone else in the family might be successful or valued. The insight was painful but accurate. Amanda's crimes weren't motivated by financial need but by psychological compulsion to dominate and diminish other family members. She always resented that you were genuinely kind and honest," Eleanor continued. "Those qualities threatened her because they highlighted what she wasn't." Grace and I drove back to Manhattan in comfortable silence, both processing the emotional complexity of justice being served within a family context. As we crossed the Queensboro Bridge, Grace reached over and took my hand. "How are you feeling about everything?" she asked. "Sad," I admitted. Relieved that Eleanor is safe, grateful for justice, but ultimately just sad that my sister chose to become a criminal rather than a decent human being. "You know what I've learned in 6 years of prosecuting family crimes?" Grace said thoughtfully. "The victims almost always blame themselves for not seeing the warning signs sooner. But predators are skilled manipulators who exploit love and trust. Amanda spent years perfecting her techniques on your family. We pulled into my apartment building's parking garage, and Grace turned to face me directly. Daryl, I need you to understand something crucial. You didn't cause Amanda's criminal behavior. You didn't deserve her abuse, and you're not responsible for her choices. What you are responsible for is protecting yourself and people you love from future manipulation. The conversation reminded me why I had fallen in love with Grace. Her combination of legal intelligence, emotional insight, and moral clarity made her both an exceptional prosecutor and an extraordinary partner. 6 months later, Grace and I were planning our own engagement celebration. Unlike Amanda's elaborate manipulation at Le Bernardin, our gathering would be simple, honest, and focused on people who genuinely cared about our happiness. Eleanor had offered to host the party in the community room at Sunset Manor, insisting that she wanted to contribute something meaningful to our celebration. The guest list included my parents, Grace's family close friends, and the social workers who had helped Eleanor transition to her new life. As I reflected on the past year, I realized that Amanda's cruelty had inadvertently led to profound blessings. Without her crimes being exposed, I might never have developed such a close relationship with Eleanor. Without the crisis at Le Bernardin Grace, and I might never have discovered how well we functioned as partners under extreme pressure. Most importantly, I had learned that family relationships must be based on mutual respect and genuine love, not obligation or blood relation. Some people earn the title of family through their actions and character, while others forfeit it through abuse and manipulation. Eleanor's watercolor painting of the cherry blossoms now hung in my living room, a daily reminder that beauty and growth can emerge from the darkest circumstances. The flowers were indeed brighter when you weren't worried all the time. The final lesson from Amanda's crimes was perhaps the most valuable: justice delayed is not justice denied, and truth has a way of surfacing even when buried under layers of lies and manipulation. Family isn't just about sharing DNA. It's about sharing values, respect, and genuine care for each other's well-being. I had lost a sister, but gained a deeper understanding of what family really means. And that understanding would guide me toward building the kind of family relationships based on love, rather than control, honesty, rather than manipulation, and respect, rather than exploitation. Grace was right. The people who truly deserve to be called family are the ones who prove it through their actions, not their genetics. As we planned our future together, I felt grateful for the painful lessons that had taught me the difference between relatives and family, between obligation and love, and between enabling abuse and protecting the people who matter most. Have you ever experienced a situation where someone you trusted betrayed that trust in a devastating way? How did you rebuild your sense of family and community afterward? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family betrayal and finding justice. Share this with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone in dealing with manipulative family members. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember that true family is defined by love and respect, not just blood relations. Until next time, protect your boundaries and trust your instincts about the people in your life.